Today we ask the age-old question, to clear or not to clear? Let's jump over, check it out. Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Beaver, and today we ask the age-old question, do you have to let your wash clear, or is it okay to run it while the yeast is still in suspension? So the question is, do you run it as a clear wash? As you can see here, it's crystal clear, you can see all the way through. Or a couple of days after fermentation is done, your wash generally looks like this, with a hell of a lot of yeast in suspension. Now that question is one that has been plaguing me, because it takes a bit of time, depending on what kind of yeast you use, to go from a cloudy wash to a nice and clear wash like this. And does it actually make a big difference when it comes to the actual taste and flavor and profile of the product that you are making? So yeah, let's quickly get into it and walk you through the steps I took to get to the point where we actually did the distillation. Now for this experiment, I started with a wash that I'm very familiar with, a brown sugar wash. So I started off by taking my urn, put about 20 liters of water into the urn, and then got it up to a nice rolling boil. Once it was at a rolling boil, I then went ahead and put in some brown sugar, stirred the sugar, and waited for the sugar to dissolve. Now the brown sugar we are using is pure cane sugar, so yeah, no artificial preservatives or any colorants or anything is added. So it's a nice clean wash. Now the reason why I went with the brown sugar is I know the flavor because I've distilled it so many times. So after I got the sugar all nice and dissolved, I then went on and took some lemon juice, some straightforward lemon off the tree, juiced it up, and just added the juice of one lemon into the wash, gave it a nice stir, and left it boiling, just a nice slow rolling boil for about 20 minutes, and that is to invert the sugars. Now the reason why I want to invert the sugars, I want to eliminate as many of the flavor differentiators as we can for this experiment. Now the reason behind that is that if you invert sugars, you tend to remove some of that sugar bowl or that kind of flavors you get when you open up a bag of sugar for the first time and you get hit with that musty, sugary kind of smell. Now I want to eliminate those kind of flavors or that sickly sweet smell that you get from sugar. By inverting it, we tend to remove some of those flavors as well. So after I left the urn to boil for about 20 minutes and inverting the sugar, we ended up taking that fermenter and leaving it overnight to cool down nice and gently to get the liquid up to our pitching temperature that we need to pitch the yeast. We then added some yeast nutrients. Now the yeast nutrients I'm using is just from Yebrew. It's a simple super nutrient that they mix up, little bags. I'll put a link down in the description if you want to get your hands on some of it. But at the end of the day, we added our nutrients. We then added the yeast, and we let that whole fermenter, the whole batch, ferment for about 3 days. Now the reason for this is I want that yeast colony on the inside to be the same yeast colony. I didn't want to separate the wash beforehand and then pitch different yeasts or whatever. So I wanted to remove as many of the variables as possible. So what I did is I let it ferment for about 3 days. After 3 days, I then decanted that wash into 2 separate fermenters. Just gave it a quick stir just to get everything nice and incorporated, and then I separated it into 2 different fermenters and let those 2 fermenters ferment and until the fermentation was done. Okay, the one I left to clear, and I actually used bentonite to clear that that fermentation, allowing everything to settle out, and we ended up with a very clear liquid. The next one, I didn't use any bentonite. I left it all as well as long as the other one, but right before I put it into the boiler, I just gave it a quick mix, getting that yeast into suspension again, and then I put it into the boiler. So worst case scenario, all the yeast you immediately started fermenting right after you tested your gravity and you saw that the fermentation was done. So worst case scenario. So yeah, we did the 2 runs. We did both runs nice and slowly, taking off the run nice and slow to ensure that we give ample time for the flavors and everything to come through. Now, the reason why we did a nice and slow run is I wanted to control, once again, as many of the variables as possible. So the still we used was my little baby still over here for doing the 2 runs. Luckily with this still, it has a nice little column at the top, and the passive reflux caused us to be able to take off the run at a relatively high ABV, because I only wanted to do 1 run, so a one and done run, to have as much of the flavor that we're going to get to carry over. So yeah, we ended up taking a nice little run, and we did the 2 runs at exactly the same pace, and we took roughly the same amount of liquid off both of them. The tails did come in a little bit earlier on the one with the yeast in, as well as the initial flavors took a little bit longer to clear up. But yeah, we ended up with roughly the same ABV as well as volume of liquid between the cleared and the uncleared wash. Then after distillation, I took both the washes, the cleared and the uncleared. I proofed them both down and got them into bottles, proofed them down to about 50%. I left them for about 6 days, and I did a hot and cold cycle of them about 4 times. So the hot and cold cycle is just heating the bottle up. So I took some hot water, dunked the bottles into hot water, allowed them to come up to temperature, took them out, allowed them to cool down, put them in a fridge, and just repeated that cycle. The reason why I do that is it just removes any of the jagged edges that you would normally get when you proof down liquid from a high ABV to a low ABV rapidly. So you just want all those flavors to meld back together, and giving it ample time. Couple of weeks is normally what I go for, but if I'm in a rush, I normally just hot and cold cycle it, and I get the same results. So yeah, on this side we have the, I wrote unfiltered, but it was the uncleared wash. So this is the uncleared wash, and this bottle here is the cleared wash. So yeah, let's quickly decant them into little tasting glasses, and let's see if there's any difference in flavor, and if it is necessary for you to allow your wash to clear. Now on this side we have the filtered or the cleared, and on this side we have the uncleared wash. So initially, right off the bat, the cleared one has a cleaner smell. It doesn't have that grungy, funky smell that you normally get from a new distilled spirit. Remember that the reason why I went with a sugar wash is that sugar washes are generally used to go to neutral. So you're going to use it for something else. You're not going to drink it neat. You are going to be using it for something else, making a gin or making a rum or whatever. So right off the bat, this does have a cleaner smell. Also smells slightly sweeter, and it doesn't have any off-putting flavors. This side here has a little bit of a dusty, sugary kind of smell to it, and it also has a little bit of a moldy smell right at the back. Now let's taste it and see if there's any difference in the taste. Okay, for the filtered, it's sweet, has a little bit of that brown sugary type of flavors, and it finishes nice and sweet and clean at the end. Now the uncleared one does have that trademark homemade booze taste to it. Now, if you ever had homemade booze, you would know what I'm talking about. It has that kind of distilled smell to it and flavor to it as I'm exhaling now. That is just trademark of something that's homemade. So in my opinion, does clearing your wash make a difference? And if anybody knows the actual science facts behind what happens to the yeast during distillation, I tried to do research, couldn't find anything online or anything that made any sense. Yeah, if you have any information, please put it down in the description. I would really love to read it, or in the comments, because it does make a big difference. There is a marked difference between the cleared and the uncleared wash. And yeah, I guess, in my opinion, take that extra couple of days to clear your wash to ensure that it doesn't interfere with the flavor. Now, the question is this true for all other washes? Do you want that grungy kind of musty flavors to pull through in a whiskey or a rum that you're going to be aging? Do you want those kind of flavors? And should you then distill it once it's done fermenting with the yeast in suspension, or should you not? Now, if you want me to do a couple more of those kind of experiments, please let me know down in the comments, and I'll gladly see if I can get around to doing a couple of different runs, not with sugar, but maybe like a whiskey or a rum, to see if it makes a big difference when you distill with the yeast in suspension or not. Now, if you're interested in that kind of thing, please let me know. Now, if you stuck around this far, thank you very much for watching, and have a lekker day. More myself.